Look, I know in some ways we're sick of COVID and we're over it, we're done to death with it, and the last thing we want to do is talk about it, but I'm also conscious that if we're involved in the learning space, then we are continually niggling away at the question about what is it asking of us and what are we doing about it. And I'm conscious that there's a lot of expertise in this room and a lot of people who are thinking about that question, and I'd love to just grab a little bit of time to have a conversation around what that feels like for us and what we're doing about it. And I've kind of framed it around two questions, I guess. The first one is around what is expected of learning. What has COVID said of us? This is the expectation about what learning needs to do now that it didn't before. And then the second part is, if that's the expectation, what's the response?
Kia ora everybody. It's a really good question. We have 22,000 learners spread up gullies and all over the place up inside the country. They're on ships out at sea, they're all over the place. So we have a really varied workplace, and typically we rely on paper-based ways of reaching those people because often connectivity is an issue and all the rest of it, blah, blah, blah. During the COVID time, our industries basically trucked on, but they shut the doors and they said, we're really busy. Training is the lowest thing on our
lowered expectations.
Lowered expectations. However, we tried many things. And I'm running a research project if anybody's interested about what you tried, so I'm looking for participants. It's a sidebar. But what happened was that there was a change, not so much with our learners, but within government that said, hey, we need to do this, you all need to go online, because that's what they understand, that's what they know. And the response within our own staff was, oh, we need to go online. And the biggest thing that happened was actually there's an expectation from our staff that we can go online.
Right.
But there's some of them, it's really varied. So I come from a learning development background, and so we had the same thing. We had reading behind glass, so we need to get interactive PDFs to our students. And I'm going, no, I'm not going to do that. That's the worst way to learn ever. You know, we need to change the pedagogy. We need to think about what is the change in behaviour. So that was the big thing. But then we had others that were already in that space, and they're saying, okay, so how do I do things differently? How do I assess differently? And so across our cohort, not so much in our learners, but in our staff, there's a change in behaviours that said, okay, I need to get into this space. The depth of understanding of what that space means really depended on how they'd interacted beforehand. Yeah. And that's the big change. My job was to bring everybody, not to 1990, but 2020, and say no reading behind glass, no more SCORMs, no more, click, read, click. That's all gone. What is it the person's got to do to have a change in behaviour?
That word do is important, huh?
What are they doing? What are they reading?
Yep.
Which goes to
yes, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. David?
Yep. Kia ora koutou. I'll tackle this from two roles I have. One is my day job is in Unitec, Polytechnic up in Auckland, now part of the big coming together of 16 previously highly competitive polytechnics to one happy family.
How's that looking now?
Which will be, depends where you are in the country, I think, will be the 35th largest tertiary organisation in the world, apparently. So it's quite impressive. And secondly, from one of the board roles that I have on the board of a professional association called EdTech New Zealand, which some of you might know as a sort of connected with the NZ Tech Alliance. So COVID happened, and we're campus face-to-face teaching, and in 5 days we were online, and we were absolutely surprised that we managed to do that. So we sent our students home. We said, go home and study for a week, and we'll get back in touch. And on Monday we were teaching on Zoom, and so nobody believed that we had that sort of resilience or energy or commitment in the organisation. And our head of school of business said to me shortly afterwards, COVID has achieved what would have taken me 10 years to get my professional workforce into the 20th century, to your point. So I think the first point is around the staff side, not the learner side. We're having to retool, learn rapidly, and start to press buttons, I suppose. But it was not a sophisticated response, right? We were all in emergency response mode. So where we are now is, how do we do this properly? What is a sustainable, highly flexible, learner-centred approach, as opposed to come to our campus at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, please. yes, for some people that works, and that should still be an option, but also we have to be much more distributed in our learning approach. And the students, of course, they just took to it like a duck to water. And they were just saying, why weren't you recording the lectures from the professors, etc., beforehand, and you must do that from now on. So that was an interesting union negotiation, among other things. So big, fast change, but still a very nascent developmental L&D quality, right? I mean, these are 400 professional teachers, but they're having to reinvent their pedagogy. Moving to EdTech New Zealand, and a little ad for that. So this is an organisation for those businesses, schools, not-for-profits interested in the convergence of education and technology. It's been going about 3 or 4 years now. So we've got people like Microsoft and Amazon in there, and school principals, etc., startups. So if you're in that space, check it out. And what we're seeing there is because EdTech as a concept has been around for about, I guess, 10 years in New Zealand in one shape or form. We're suddenly going, is this our time? As people learning and working in that convergence, were we ready? Probably not. Have we got all the answers? No, but we actually do have a potential community of practice across the country because a whole bunch of businesses and organisations have woken up. And we're seeing some really cool stuff happening in startups. Startups working with schools, with the ministry, and more commercial things, which traditionally would have been export focused. Now we're seeing some benefit for New Zealand. So, we're still in year 1 of this new normal. But from my point of view, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's forced change. It's really maybe save some of us 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jenny?
It's probably 2 things for me. One is greater focus on wellbeing, and the other one is about learning being more nimble. So the greater focus on wellbeing is, health and safety is a really important part of our culture anyway, given the industry that we're in. So we're constantly looking at risks, and we identified during COVID the greatest risk was to the wellbeing of our people. And so we pivoted and did quite a lot of learning that was around looking after yourself and mental health and that kind of stuff. And it was interesting. Those are conversations we'd been wanting to have with our people for a while, but we didn't feel like we had permission, and this gave us an opportunity to really accelerate that and kind of, I guess, open the closet on mental health a little bit. And we had, some virtual forums with guest speakers and a bunch of resources on our intranet that were able to get up quite quickly, and that had a really great response from our people. So that was probably the one. And, now we've got this opportunity to keep that going, which is awesome. The other one's about being nimble. And so one of the things that I think we need to let go of is slick, polished, gorgeous learning experiences, because they take time and they take a lot of money. And the problem with them taking a lot of money is that the minute you've rolled it out, things change and you need to do something else. You've sunk all this money on something that's now no longer relevant. But also it takes you too long to get it up and running. And during COVID, we had to get people up and running on stuff really, really quickly. So I would scribble on a Microsoft whiteboard and record the screen with a voiceover and get that out in like 20 minutes. And it did the job, and people understood and were really responsive to that. And I think that idea that we talk about in human-centered design of kind of, having something that you go from tricycle to car, but the tricycle does the job, and sometimes all you need is a tricycle, right? So getting our learners to kind of accept that and still relate to that as a great learning experience, because it does the job, it's quick, and you can get stuff happening. So I think that's probably the other thing that it's accelerated that, and now we can kind of keep going with scribbling on a whiteboard and a bit of voiceover and get stuff out really fast. So,
Thank you, Julie. Yes, thank you all. What's the race for you guys? What's going on in your heads? How are you responding? Any contributions? Yeah, thank you.
I'm from the Ministry for Primary Industries. So I guess pre-COVID we did have the very traditional learning organisation and very classroom focused. And what I saw, there were 2 things. So one was an agile coach said to me during lockdown, well, guess what? Everybody's working agile now. I said, what do you mean by that? They said they're focusing on the most important things. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think the same thing happened and flowed through learning. I think the other thing that's happened since is actually we're changing the narrative. So yes, we did all the Zoom thing and that was all great, but we're now saying, well, what happens after? hey guys, we're not going to go back. And we're digging into flexibility. So flexibility was on the government's agenda, but actually there it was in action, and learning could suddenly support that contribution to flexible workplace. So I think we're trying to influence their minds to go, actually life will be different and some of this is going to continue.
And it's not about finding comfort by going back.
Yeah.
It's about finding comfort in the future and how we respond to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. What I've seen, Magda from Meridian Energy, so what I've seen happening, and I want to build on that a little bit as well, is more flexibility, empowering learners to create their own career pathways, because one of the days of planning 4 or 5 years ahead of time to go, this is what we want to do, not only is learning changing, but the whole entire New Zealand is changing. The places in which we need skill is changing as well, and we need to adapt to that. So, with the younger generations coming in, they want those quick wins, and it's just kind of empowering them to have a flexible environment where they can actually flourish in that, and go like, I'm going to build my skill to where it's needed at that point in time, because we don't know what it's going to be in 6 months' time.
And that's the challenge, right? So you're talking about career pathways and the ability to shape your own future and own that and go with it. But we've got COVID on top of future work.
Yes.
And that creates such a volume of uncertainty about what the jobs are, let alone what the skills are that are going to be required to achieve those, let alone what my pathway is to get there.
Yeah.
So there's a huge challenge around putting people in a position where they can have a sense of ownership about their future in a world of such spectacular uncertainty. Is anyone grappling with that issue? I mean, traditionally you would build a competency framework which goes by level and roles within an organisation, and you would understand the pathways through those and the skills that are required to do that. I mean, is that even a realistic aspiration to have these days? I don't know, is it?
I think you've got to build resilience.
Yeah.
That's the first thing, because the COVID-19 is the current pandemic, and we're moving into, there'll be more of these, and as we go, you have to build resilience, and resilience comes from a knowledge of what you're able to do despite.
In the face of.
Yep.
And for us, it was also realising that our extension audience wasn't necessarily farmers during the lockdown. It was actually our facilitators and helping them build their skills, because farmers were going, oh, well, those who have connectivity, because that is an issue, they were going, oh, let's jump on Zoom, let's connect. But the facilitators were going, I've never done that before, oh my goodness, And so we had to really focus on making sure they were capable and help and supporting them.
Aspiration, capability, aspiration, capability.
Absolutely, that's right, yeah, precisely, but good crisis.
Greg.
Yeah, Phil, kia ora, Greg Deeper from BCITO. So we've got about 16,000 apprentices. Interesting thing is that 93% of our firms have 5 staff or less. So every year with a dog and a ladder on it is a company.
Yeah.
So that's a learning environment for us. So we stood up some pretty major stuff during lockdown, and like everyone else did. But the point is that afterwards, and at the time, employers were grateful, but at the time I knew that there'd be a significant shift in the locus of control, and that now after lockdown, because we haven't just produced that for just the learner, because the learner sits in an environment, they sit in a family, so how you're not just actually educating that person, you have to think about the system that they operate within. And that's meant some interesting challenges for us. So our employers are we now actually have to deliver a whole lot more for our employers as well, so they keep up, because the technology can be disempowering to them as well. So it's this thing you just got to think about what are some of the social changes here, and how that
impacts.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Thank you.
Going to back to David's point and comment, were we ready? Probably not, but yet in 5 days, they had it online.
Yeah.
I think you were ready, and I think I decided after 20 years of being in the digital learning space to take 2020 off.
As we do.
You know, in some ways was great.
To travel?
I've got a 7 and 10-year-old, and I was going to spend time with them for a year. And I spent more time with them superintendent, I'm a teacher. And yeah, I won't go into the good and bad things that happen at the school, which I'm on the board of. But to your point again, there were a lot of I fielded some calls during lockdown. We're trying to do this. How do we do it? Well, how would you do it if you didn't have time? Should we do it like this? Okay, do that and do it faster. And you're hearing all these stories of during lockdown we got this stood up in a couple of days. The fact that the government got before I got online, my background was educational television. The fact that they got an educational television station up and running in a week, and like you said, Judy, this wasn't sexy, but it was effective learning. Unfortunately, my kids were more interested in computer television, especially educational television. But I think it shows that actually we were probably more prepared than what we thought we were. Because stuff got stood up pretty damn quick.
Yeah, but it's the reflection. I mean, never waste a good crisis, right?
Yeah, totally.
But it took a crisis for us to make those steps.
Yeah.
That's the hindsight, really. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stuff we've all been trying to get to happen for years.
That's right.
And that is encouraging, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
for the Christchurch Synopsis team, Otatahi, sort of a year, 18 months after the earthquakes, at some point through that process, we were deconstructing what that was like for us, and the same challenges, right? How do we keep people safe? How do we help people cope? And how do we continue to deliver to our clients? Most of whom were not living in the experience that we were, and that's a big difference with the COVID spaces that everyone shares that. But for us in Christchurch, we were living under the spotlight of a world that was functioning normally and yet dealing with those same challenges. And one of the interesting things that came out of that process was that we were probably working 40 or 50% of it productively in terms of what we would normally do in a week. And we were spending most of our time and energy emotionally and with our families. And yet the outside world seemed to feel pretty comfortable with what we were delivering. Our clients were certainly respectful of the situation we were in, but they were actually happy with what we were doing. We were, how does that work? How does it work that you can do that in half the time? And I'd love to know how you could bottle that. But at the heart of it, I think that's the opportunity out of COVID, is that we can reframe what we believe that we're capable of doing. And I hope that that's something that bubbles up for all of us. Thank you for taking the time out this morning to come and korero with us. We've really appreciated you making that space. We'll do it again if you're interested.
Cool.
Thank you.